G'day everyone. Thought it might be a really good time to discuss my opinions about whether you should be buying the a7 III or the a9. So I thought it might be a great time to discuss that. Now there's a couple of things that you've got to take into account when we're discussing this. It depends really on how much money that you have for your purchase. But if you have got enough money where you would think, well, I'm going to buy, say, the A9 and I've also got enough money to get a lens, or you've already got lenses, or you're just starting out and you're just coming in and say, I've only got enough for a cheaper camera, say like the a7 III, and then to add a lens to it as well. But I thought we'd talk about it overall because I do get an awful lot of questions from people sort of thinking, well, which camera should I get? You know, is one way better than the other? And things like that. And I thought it might be particularly interesting at the moment due to the fact that both the firmwares have just been updated recently. There's also a really good special on at the moment where the A9 is $1,000 off. So at the moment, you're only dealing with roughly $1,400 difference between both cameras. Now, yes, that may be a lot for you if that really is outside of your range, because that $1,400 you could buy a lens. But my discussion is going to be more about what the differences are. Now, remember, I use both of these cameras all the time, and I'm going to talk about it from my experience to you about, is it worth paying the extra $1,400, particularly with the special on at the moment. I mean, if you're looking at both the cameras, you know, I'm not going to show the prices here because you're not meant to. It's just one of the things if you've got affiliate links, but I shouldn't show the actual prices. So, you know, like the a7 III at the moment, you know, is roughly around about $2,000, and the a9 is about $1,400 dearer at this stage. Both very similar in bodies, but I'll talk about the differences in a minute so that we can discuss that. But if you've sort of got the feel of the bodies, they're very, very similar. And things like that. It's just a few controls and things like that that are actually different. You know, so this is one of the big differences for me because I do use both all the time. In fact, I shot a wedding with both on the weekend. And so now I'm used to using both all the time. And I mean, I've been doing that for a long, long period of time now. But, you know, if you're looking at the bodies themselves, they are very, very similar. I mean, in how they look. So I wouldn't worry really about sort of thinking about it if that's one of the issues. Basically, they're exactly the same. The main difference for me is the fact that they do have the extra controls at the top. So you have got these extra controls on the top on this side, and that makes it so much easier to work the camera rather than having to go through menus and things like that. And I do... like I said to you, because I'm using both, I do constantly end up looking for these extra buttons when I'm using my a7 III. So that is a big difference between how the two of them work. I mean, on this dial itself, this extra dial, you know, you've got whether you want to shoot your high speed, you've also got your timer and your bracketing on there, and underneath that you've got your focusing mode. So it's very, very easy to just change between AFS and AFC and DMF, or even manual focus. So I do find that I constantly look for that when I am using my a7 III. So that's one of the big differences. So body wise, like I said, they're very, very similar, but I do love that added control, and I really wish all of the cameras now would have that. It's just an amazing thing to have. So that's sort of talking about handling of the body with these cameras. Now, overall, that's the same. Now, there's a difference though, when you're looking at if you're dealing with the camera itself. The EVF on the A9 is way better than what it is on the a7 III, and I'm talking way better. But if you're using it day to day, you won't notice really that much of a difference with the EVF. You only really notice when you bring up the EVF, because I use both together, and like I said, I'm shooting weddings, because I bring them both up together and I'm looking between both of them, I will notice that there's a big difference between the A9, particularly over this. Now, obviously, being Sony's entry-level camera, they had to keep costs down. If you've got the a7iii, it has the same EVF as the A9, so you've got the same EVF there. But I'm not talking about the a7iii here, because I'm talking about these cameras, because of the fact that they're both the 24 megapixel cameras that I love to use for weddings and events and things like that. So that's the main difference between the two, is the EVF is much better on the A9. So that's the body handling part. Let's talk now about, I'll talk about video, about photography first, and then we'll go through some video features and we'll talk about that, the difference between these two bodies and how I use them. But if we're talking about photography, they really are leagues apart in the fact of how they both work, particularly now after the latest update. Even before that update, I still preferred to use the A9 over the A7 III due to the fact that the focusing was that much quicker. Look, I wouldn't say it was dramatically quicker, but it was definitely quicker that I could notice the difference. So that's one issue if you're talking about focusing between the two cameras. The other big difference, excuse me, too, is that with the focusing, I do a lot of dance type work and things like that, where, you know, I'll be doing dances that will be running across, doing jumps and things like that. The lock-on focus is way quicker on the A9 than it is on the A7 III, and it's much quicker even before the firmware updates have come out, and now it's even better than that. But there's a couple of big differences there if we're talking about from photography the side of things. If we're dealing with weddings, if you're dealing with, say, dance work that I do, having a silent shutter in the A9 that actually works and is reliable. When I say reliable, I mean that you're not going to get banding. You can get banding, but I haven't seen it. You're not going to get banding, and you're also not going to get rolling shutter. There's massive differences between the way these two cameras work. I can safely use the A9, and like I said, I've never had any issues with it at all, in silent shutter, whereas the A7 III, I would not want to use that in a wedding scenario under lighting because of the fact that it may cause banding. And someone recently just sent me some images where it had happened, and they didn't notice until they got home. That's the problem. Sometimes the banding just doesn't show on the EVF or the LCD screen. So that's one of the issues in that regard. So it's something you do have to consider if you're thinking about that. I wouldn't use the silent shutter with anything that's moving with the A7 III. The sensor is just not fast enough. Whereas I can use it at any time with the A9. In fact, it will stop a golf swing. It's that fast when you're dealing with that with the A9. The other thing too is you're dealing with 60 times per second. This sensor will autofocus, so it actually looks at that 60 times a second. So it's way faster, the sensor, than it is on the A7 III, which I think is around 20. I can't remember the exact figure, but I know it was way different, or the A9 is way above that. The other benefit too, if you're dealing with dancing and where they're jumping or doing sports and things like that, is this has totally, the A9 has a blackout-free EVF, which means you can follow the tracking continuously. There's none of that blacking out for a few seconds when you take your shots, which can mean that you can miss things, particularly, like I said, if dancers with me are running and jumping, that can mean the difference of getting a shot. The other thing is I'll get 20 frames per second on the A9, whereas I'm only getting 10 frames per second on the A7 III. So there's a big difference there. Now that can be the difference between getting a dancer that has that perfect leg position or that perfect jump, than if you get one where it's not quite perfect, because there is a big difference between that extra 10 frames per second. But that's in work without doing flash. If you're dealing with flash work, the A7 III actually moves ahead if you need to use fast flash work, because with flash you have to use mechanical shutter, and the A9 only has I think it's 5 frames per second, whereas the A7 III has 10 frames per second. So if you are dealing with flash photography where you have to stop motion very, very quickly, the A7 III moves a little bit ahead. I very rarely need to use flash though where I'm using it continuously like that, so that's not an issue for me. But if it is an issue for you and you wanted to, say, stop a bike or something like that, you know, a BMX bike or anything where you're using flash to freeze the motion, you might be better, well, you probably would be better with the A7 III due to the fact that you could, say, use something like a Profoto or whatever you want to use that can keep up with that 10 frames per second. and you could freeze the motion using flash. So that's a time where you would use the a7 III over the A9. But you know, there's just so many, and this is the thing I'm just trying to point out to you, that if you have got the money, you might want to take advantage of that $1,000 discount, because not only that though, when you're dealing with silent shutter with the A9, you can shoot up to 1/32,000th of a second. This is huge for me, because it means that when I'm doing a wedding or something like that and I want to shoot wide open, for instance, if I got the new 135 f1.8 lens and I want to shoot with that at 1.8 on a bright sunny day, I can do that easily without having to have NDs or closing the shutter down, because you've got that 1/32,000th of a second. So it's a massive extra feature that I use all the time. And these are the things that give me so much of a benefit, like I said, in the work that I'm doing. Another incredibly useful feature with like I said, with the A9 is the blackout-free shooting. But since the new firmware update, the tracking alone is just outstanding. And having that ability to just touch on the back of the screen, or, you know, just lock onto an object, but whatever you initially focus on, and have that object being tracked, is incredible. And I use that on the weekend, and I really didn't want to put my A9 down. In fact, this is the first wedding where I've shot nearly the whole wedding with the A9, due to the fact of how well that camera now works with that new version 5 firmware update. Yes, the a7 III has had one, and the IAF definitely gives you better tracking in the eye. I mean, like, it is much more sticky if you're dealing with that. But it just doesn't meet anywhere near the performance that the A9 live tracking gives you, following the subject, following the bride walking down the aisle, or even doing other things. That tracking was outstanding. And like I said, I really didn't want to put it down just for that reason alone. So the main things, I think at this stage, and I'll go on to videography in a second, the main things for me between the two cameras is the blackout-free EVF is a huge one. The no rolling shutter is also a really big deal for me, particularly, like I said, if I'm shooting dancing and things like that. So I'm not going to have any issues with that rolling shutter, where they can blurring can do really strange things with the image. Having the ability to shoot 20 frames per second, you know, they're things for me that are leagues ahead of what the a7 III can, and also that live tracking alone now has taken that A9 to basically be an A9 II. It really is that good in that update. You know, it's basically like having a new camera. So that's the features if you're talking about stills alone. And like I said, you have to make a decision in what you can afford. It's $1,400 difference at the moment with that special, but you could say buy a Tamron 28 to 75 with that money that you're saving. So if money is a big issue, I can understand the fact that you may say you want to get the a7 III and you've got enough money to buy a lens. But if you've got a bit more money to play with, the $1,400 that you pay extra for the A9 is well worth it when you look at the features and the technology that you're getting in that camera. The sensor is leagues ahead of what the a7 III has. In fact, I think it's leagues ahead of anything that's available in the marketplace at the moment. So that's that aspect if we're talking about the still side of things. So let's go on to videography, and we'll talk about that side of it. Well, the main difference between the two of them is the a7 III is more of a video camera in the fact that it has a profile. So if you do need the profiles, for instance, if you want to shoot S-Log, if you want to shoot HDL, all those sort of things, well, you really have to choose the a7 III. And that's due to the fact that you've got those profiles there if you need them. Personally, I don't shoot with picture profiles. I'm very, very happy with how the colors look standard from the Sony cameras. Even in high dynamic range scenarios, like I said, when I'm shooting weddings and things like that, I'm finding that I can get perfect results just using an ND, exposing correctly, just making sure I don't blow out the highlights, and I'm getting really acceptable results by shooting that standard profile. So for me, I'm not worried about the standard profile not being in the A9, and in fact, the A9 is my preferred camera for shooting video, particularly seeing now that they've got the tracking that's involved with the A9, that I can click on the bride walking down the aisle, or I can click on that dancer that's moving around, and it's going to track that person in video. The a7 III can't do that, and that is a big deal for me. But like I said, I'm not a full-on videographer, so if you are more into full-on videography and you need those picture profiles, then clearly you would have to move down onto the a7 III. I've found performance-wise ISO, that, look, there may be a difference. I think I've seen before where people say the a7 III is slightly better, but I haven't noticed any difference at all between the two of them. I find them both the same in the usage that I deal with them. In fact, if I'm anywhere near 6400, I'm adding light anyway. So that's one of the things with me in that regard. I've found the look of the... Now, this is a personal thing, and I know people always say to me, I don't agree with you. Well, that's fine. We all see different things in cameras. I've found that the full frame look on the A9 is slightly better than it is on the a7 III due to the fact of the way that sensor works. I know on the a7 III they say to get the best quality you should be using Super 35. I've found that on the A9 you don't have to do that. The video, there's no penalty loss between using full frame and Super 35. So I usually shoot with my A9 in full frame mode. And, you know, I'd love to hear what some of you full-time videographers say about that, but that's just what I've found by looking at it, that the video is just slightly better on the full frame side of things in 1080p I'm talking about, not 4K. In 1080p, full frame on the A9 is just slightly better. It's more for me about the focusing ability that the A9 has that makes that a camera for me that's slightly better than the a7 III. If you need profiles, you need to obviously go for the a7 III, whereas I prefer the A9. I'm not sure if I got muddled up a little bit there. So it's really interesting. Like I said, I wanted to have this discussion with you, and please leave some comments down below because I'd love to know what you think about this as well. I just think at the moment, with the price that they're doing for the A9, with that firmware update, it really is unbeatable. When you think I paid $7,000 Australian for that A9, and I think now you can buy it for $4.5 or something, that's a massive price drop. Do I regret buying it at that price? No, not at all, because it's still the best camera that I've ever had. And I honestly believe if you can afford to get the A9, particularly now with that firmware update, that is the camera to get for Sony. Even if Sony brought out a new one, I don't think they will this year. Even if they brought out a new one in 12 months, that camera is still going to be outstanding for the next few years. It is that far ahead of anything that's out there at the moment. Love to know what you think about all of this. Please leave that in the comments down below, and I'll see you all again soon for the next video. Bye for now.